Long before pharmacies lined every corner in America, the Cherokee, Lakota, and Ojibwe were already prescribing medicine from the forest floor. Roots were pulled at dawn, bark was stripped in autumn, and leaves were crushed between river stones. Thousands of years of trial and careful observation built a living pharmacy that European botanists would later scramble to document. But the real surprise is how close that pharmacy still is. These plants grow wild across North America today, and there is a decent chance at least 5 of them are within 100 feet of where you are sitting right now. Number 15. Goldenrod. If you have ever driven past a roadside ditch in late summer and seen tall stalks covered in bright yellow plumes swaying against the fence line, you were probably looking at goldenrod, known by its Latin name solidago. Its Latin name comes from a word meaning to make whole, and that etymology was not accidental. Cherokee healers chewed goldenrod leaves into a poultice and packed them directly against wounds to reduce swelling and prevent infection. Iroquois healers brewed the flowers into a tea for fever and sore throats. European settlers arriving in North America were so impressed by the plant that they shipped dried goldenrod back to London, where it sold for a premium at apothecary markets. The irony is that goldenrod has spent the last century being blamed for seasonal allergies it does not cause. Ragweed, which blooms at the same time and looks something like goldenrod, is the actual culprit. Goldenrod pollen is too heavy and sticky to travel on the wind. It depends entirely on insects for pollination, which is why you will find bees crawling all over goldenrod plumes in September, while ragweed releases its invisible, airborne pollen a few yards away. Because the two plants flower in the same weeks of August and September, goldenrod took the blame and earned a reputation as a weed worth pulling. Entire generations of gardeners have ripped it out of their yards based on a case of mistaken identity. Modern laboratory analysis has since confirmed that goldenrod contains leocarposide, a compound with measurable anti-inflammatory properties, validating what Cherokee healers recognized long before the compound had a name. The next plant on this list is one you have almost certainly seen blooming in an empty lot at dusk, and its story traces all the way from Ojibwe medicine lodges to modern European pharmacies. Number 14. Evening Primrose. Oenothera biennis opens its pale yellow flowers at twilight, which is how it earned its common name. The Ojibwe used the whole plant. They soaked the roots to make a poultice for bruises, applied the leaves to skin rashes, and brewed a warm tea from the seeds to ease breathing during respiratory illness. The plant was so central to their medicinal practice that early French missionaries documented its use in letters sent back to Europe. Modern chemistry eventually caught up to what Ojibwe healers had observed. Evening primrose seeds are unusually rich in gamma-linolenic acid, an omega-6 fatty acid that the human body uses to regulate inflammation. This discovery turned evening primrose oil into one of the first indigenous North American remedies to be formally adopted into European pharmacopoeias. Today, evening primrose oil capsules sit on pharmacy shelves in London, Berlin, and Tokyo. But for centuries before any of that, Ojibwe healers already knew what the plant could do for irritated skin and swollen airways. However, evening primrose is only the beginning of the plants hiding in plain sight. The next one is so common it probably grows in your lawn, and its chemistry connects directly to some of the most active areas of modern hormone research. Number 13. Red clover. Trifolium pratense. If you have a yard with grass, you almost certainly have red clover. Those puffy pink and purple flower heads that honeybees love grow in nearly every temperate region of North America. They grow in lawns, pastures, highway medians, and along fence lines from coast to coast. Cherokee healers used red clover as a blood purifier, brewing a tea from the blossoms to cleanse the body in early spring after months of heavy winter eating. They also employed it for persistent coughs and bronchial congestion, relying on its mild expectorant qualities to loosen tightness in the chest. Red clover caught the attention of modern researchers because of its high concentration of isoflavones, plant-based compounds that mimic estrogen at a molecular level. These isoflavones have become a major focus in studies on bone density, cardiovascular health, and menopausal symptoms. The National Institutes of Health has funded multiple clinical trials on red clover extract. Therefore, a plant that Cherokee healers used for spring cleaning the blood is now under investigation for some of the most complex hormonal questions in modern medicine. Further down this countdown sits a tree with a more complicated legacy. It was once a beloved flavor in American life until a single compound inside it changed everything. Number 12. Sassafras. Walk through the hardwood forests of the eastern United States, and you will eventually come across a tree with mitten-shaped leaves that smell like root beer when you crush them between your fingers. That is sassafras. Choctaw healers ground dried sassafras leaves into a powder called file, which is still used to thicken gumbo in Louisiana today. Cherokee healers brewed sassafras root bark into a spring tonic tea, believing it purified the blood after the long stillness of winter. European colonists loved sassafras so much that it became one of the first exports shipped from the American colonies back to England. In the 17th century, sassafras root was briefly more valuable per pound than tobacco. Ships carried barrels of it across the Atlantic alongside lumber and animal pelts. But in 1960, the FDA banned safrole, the compound responsible for sassafras root bark's distinctive flavor, after laboratory studies found it caused liver damage in rats at very high doses. That ban effectively ended the commercial sassafras tea industry overnight. The debate over whether the ban was proportional continues among herbalists today, but the traditional relationship between the Choctaw, the Cherokee, and this aromatic tree stretches back millennia before any regulator weighed in. Speaking of plants with deep roots in Appalachian and indigenous medicine, the next entry has an immediately recognizable silhouette among wild plants in North America, and its leaves feel like velvet. Number 11. Mullein. Verbascum thapsus. You will recognize it the moment you see it. A thick, tall stalk rising from a rosette of large, fuzzy, silver-green leaves that feel like soft felt. Mullein grows in disturbed soil along roadsides, in gravel lots, and at the edges of old fields. Navajo healers smoked dried mullein leaves to treat lung congestion, a practice that sounds contradictory until you understand that the smoke was thought to carry the plant's soothing compounds directly into the airways. Other nations steeped the leaves in hot water and inhaled the steam. The leaves contain a mucilage that coats irritated tissue, which is why mullein tea has persisted as a folk remedy for coughs and bronchitis in rural Appalachia since before anyone in those hills could remember. Older residents in the Smoky Mountains and the Blue Ridge still call it cowboy toilet paper because of the softness of its large leaves, and some keep dried mullein in their medicine cabinets the way a suburban household might keep cough syrup. The plant traveled with settlers and indigenous knowledge alike along the same mountain paths, its uses shared and adapted across cultures over centuries. Today, mullein leaf tea is available in health food stores, but you can also find the plant growing for free in almost any patch of dry, neglected ground. Its tall, flowering spike, covered in small yellow blossoms, is one of the easiest wild plants in North America to identify from a distance. The next plant is much smaller and far more hidden, but if you have ever walked through a shady, damp patch of woods near a creek, you have probably brushed against it without knowing that it carried a remedy for the very rash you might get from the vine growing beside it. Number 10. Jewelweed. Its scientific name is Impatiens capensis. It is also called touch-me-not because its ripe seed pods explode when you brush them. Potawatomi healers, along with many other Great Lakes and eastern woodland nations, used the juice from crushed jewelweed stems as a direct treatment for the rash caused by poison ivy. The practice was simple. Crush the succulent stem, apply the watery juice to the affected skin, and the itching and blistering would ease. What is worth paying attention to about jewelweed is where it grows. In forest after forest across eastern North America, jewelweed and poison ivy grow side by side, often within inches of each other. They share the same damp, shaded habitat along creek banks and forest edges. Indigenous healers noticed this pattern and treated it as the forest providing its own remedy right next to the problem. Modern analysis has identified saponins and a compound called lawsone in jewelweed, both of which interact with urushiol, the oil in poison ivy that causes the allergic reaction. Therefore, a remedy that might look like folk superstition turns out to have a precise chemical basis. But jewelweed is a specialist. By contrast, Ojibwe healers had a different plant that functioned as something closer to a general-purpose medicine chest, and one of its active compounds sits in your bathroom cabinet right now under a very different name. Number 9. Wild bergamot. Monarda fistulosa, sometimes called bee balm, though it is a different species from the scarlet bee balm sold in garden centers. Wild bergamot produces clusters of lavender flowers on tall, square stems and fills the air around it with a sharp, minty fragrance. Ojibwe healers brewed wild bergamot into a tea for colds, sore throats, and fevers. They also inhaled the steam from boiled leaves to clear congested sinuses. The active compound behind that sharp aroma is thymol, an antiseptic so effective that it became the primary ingredient in Listerine mouthwash when that product launched in 1914. Thymol kills bacteria on contact. Ojibwe healers did not call it thymol, but they understood that something in this plant fought infection, because their treatment outcomes proved it generation after generation. Wild bergamot is also one of the best pollinator plants native to the continent. A single patch will attract dozens of bee species, hummingbirds, and butterflies, while simultaneously resisting deer browsing. For gardeners, it is one of the rare plants that is both historically significant and practically effortless to grow. Few entries on this countdown draw a straighter line from indigenous healing knowledge to the modern pharmacy shelf. This one connects a Muskogee remedy for headaches to the most consumed medication on the planet. Number 8. White willow, Salix alba. Muskogee healers chewed the inner bark of willow trees to ease pain, reduce fevers, and calm inflammation. Cherokee healers did the same. So did healers among the Blackfeet and the Menominee. The practice of chewing willow bark for pain was so widespread across Native American nations that it represented convergent medical knowledge, arrived at independently by peoples separated by thousands of miles. Willow bark contains salicin. When ingested, the human body converts salicin into salicylic acid, the same chemical backbone that German chemist Felix Hoffmann modified in 1897 to create acetylsalicylic acid. Bayer patented that compound in 1899 under the name aspirin, and it became the most widely used medication in human history. Billions of tablets are consumed every year worldwide. The World Health Organization lists aspirin as one of the essential medicines every healthcare system should stock. The direct chemical lineage from Muskogee willow bark to the Bayer aspirin tablet is one of the most well-documented examples of indigenous knowledge informing Western pharmaceutical development. Hoffmann did not invent the pain-relieving property. He refined a delivery mechanism for a property that indigenous healers had already been using for centuries. The willow trees that Muskogee healers once walked to along the riverbank still grow across the continent, their bark still containing the same compound that went on to become one of the foundations of modern medicine. From here, the countdown follows a similar trajectory, from indigenous remedy to billion-dollar industry, but the journey has been far more controversial. Number 7. Echinacea. Echinacea purpurea, the purple coneflower. Plains nations, including the Cheyenne, Lakota, and Pawnee, used echinacea extensively. It was applied to snake bites, used as a pain reliever for toothaches, and brewed into teas for colds and upper respiratory infections. Lakota healers considered echinacea one of their most versatile plants. The root was the part most commonly used, chewed raw or ground into a paste. They also used it as a remedy for burns, and some nations rubbed crushed echinacea root on their hands and arms before handling hot coals during ceremonial fires. The scope of its traditional applications was broad enough to suggest that multiple nations had independently arrived at the conclusion that this one plant had properties worth relying on across a range of conditions. By the 1990s, echinacea had become the best-selling herbal supplement in the United States. Its rise was fueled by claims that it could boost the immune system and shorten the duration of the common cold. Scientific studies have produced mixed results. Some clinical trials show modest reductions in cold duration and severity. Others show no significant effect compared to placebo. The debate continues in immunology journals, but what is not debated is the origin. The knowledge that echinacea had medicinal properties came directly from Plains Nation's healers who had been using it for hundreds of years before it appeared in a capsule at the pharmacy. If you are learning something from this, take a moment to subscribe. This channel explores the deep history behind the plants in your garden every week, and there is plenty more ahead. However, the entry that follows carries an even more striking duality. It has been used as both a trusted medicine and a dangerous poison, and the line between the two is thinner than you might expect. Number 6. Black elderberry, Sambucus nigra. Elderberry bushes grow wild along fence rows, at the edges of fields, and in damp woodland clearings across much of North America. Cherokee and Haudenosaunee healers used elderberry preparations to treat fevers, joint pain, and respiratory infections. They knew that the ripe, cooked berries were safe, but they also knew that the raw berries, the leaves, the bark, and especially the stems, contained something harmful. What they identified through careful observation was cyanogenic glycosides, compounds that release hydrogen cyanide when metabolized. That dual identity, medicine when prepared correctly and poison when not, defined the relationship between elderberry and every nation that used it. The knowledge of preparation was critical, and it was passed down with precision. Berries had to be fully ripe. They had to be cooked, never eaten raw. The stems and leaves were avoided entirely. Getting this wrong meant vomiting, diarrhea, and in severe cases, dangerous drops in heart rate. Getting it right meant access to a potent natural antiviral agent available in the eastern woodlands. Today, elderberry extract supports a $2 billion global supplement industry. Elderberry syrups, gummies, and lozenges appear in pharmacies and grocery stores everywhere. Clinical studies have shown that elderberry extract can reduce the severity and duration of influenza symptoms, but the raw plant remains just as dangerous as it was when Cherokee healers first established the careful rules for its preparation. Elderberry was not the only plant that occupied an important place in Cherokee medicine. The one that follows was prized particularly for conditions that European doctors of the same era had almost no effective treatments for. Number 5. Black cohosh, Actea racemosa, a tall, elegant plant with long spires of white flowers that wave above the forest floor in Appalachian woodlands. Cherokee healers used black cohosh root for pain relief, for kidney conditions, and most notably for a range of women's health issues, including menstrual irregularity and the discomforts associated with menopause. Its effectiveness was recognized so early by Western medicine that black cohosh entered the United States Pharmacopoeia in 1820, making it one of the first Native American botanical medicines formally incorporated into the American medical establishment. Today, it is one of the most widely studied herbal supplements in the world, particularly for menopausal symptoms like hot flashes and mood changes. European researchers, especially in Germany, have published hundreds of studies on black cohosh extract. The German Commission E, that country's equivalent of the FDA for herbal products, has approved black cohosh for menopause-related complaints. The path from Cherokee forest medicine to German regulatory approval is long, and it began with indigenous healers who recognized what this plant could do for the women in their communities. Continuing down the list, the next plant is one you have almost certainly purchased at a drugstore, and it carries a distinction no other plant-based product in the United States can claim. Number 4. Witch hazel, Hamamelis virginiana. Haudenosaunee healers, the people of the Iroquois Confederacy, used witch hazel bark and leaf preparations to treat swelling, sore muscles, cuts, bruises, and insect bites. The bark was boiled to create a strong liquid extract that they applied directly to irritated or inflamed skin. Witch hazel is the only plant-based astringent that has been formally approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration. That approval makes it a regulated over-the-counter drug, not just a supplement. You will find witch hazel in virtually every American drugstore, usually in a clear bottle in the first aid aisle. The astringent effect comes from tannins in the bark that tighten skin tissue and reduce bleeding from minor cuts. It is also found in aftershave lotions, hemorrhoid treatments, and facial toners sold by major cosmetic brands, often without any mention of its Haudenosaunee origins on the label. It is perhaps the clearest surviving link between a specific Haudenosaunee preparation and a product that millions of Americans use regularly without knowing where the knowledge came from. Older still in medicinal use, and with a reputation that stretches not just across North America, but across the entire Northern Hemisphere, is a plant whose name reaches back to the battlefields of ancient Greece. Number 3. Yarrow, Achillea millefolium. Named for Achilles, the Greek warrior said to have used this plant to stop the bleeding of his soldiers' wounds during the Trojan War. But yarrow's medicinal use in North America predates any contact with European naming conventions. Blackfeet healers used yarrow as a primary wound treatment. They crushed the feathery leaves and pressed them into cuts to stop bleeding and prevent infection. Cherokee, Ojibwe, and Pawnee healers all used yarrow independently for similar purposes, along with treatments for headaches, digestive complaints, and fever. Yarrow's blood-stopping ability comes from achillene, which has been confirmed in laboratory studies to accelerate blood clotting. Yarrow also contains chamazuline, an anti-inflammatory compound found in the essential oil of the flowers. This combination of hemostatic and anti-inflammatory properties in a single common plant explains why it appeared in the medicine traditions of so many unconnected peoples across such a wide geography. Yarrow was not a specialist plant limited to one ailment or one region. It was a generalist, effective for battlefield wounds and kitchen burns alike, and it grew in meadows from the subarctic to the subtropics. If you have a meadow, a wildflower patch, or even a weedy border along a gravel path, there is a good chance yarrow is already there. Its flat clusters of tiny white flowers and finely divided, feather-like leaves are unmistakable once you learn to recognize them. The second plant on this list played a role in one of the most famous survival stories in the history of European exploration of North America, and it likely saved an entire expedition from death. Number 2. White pine, Pinus strobus. In the winter of 1535, the French explorer Jacques Cartier and his crew were trapped by ice along the St. Lawrence River near present-day Quebec. Scurvy had already killed 25 of his men. The rest were too sick to stand. Their gums were bleeding, their teeth were falling out, and their joints had swollen to the point of immobility. Haudenosaunee people living nearby recognized the symptoms and brought Cartier a tea brewed from the needles and bark of the white pine tree. Within a week, the surviving crew members were recovering. Cartier wrote in his journal that the remedy was a miracle. What the Haudenosaunee already knew, and what Western science would not fully understand for another 2 centuries, is that white pine needles contain concentrated vitamin C. A single cup of white pine needle tea can contain as much vitamin C as 5 oranges. The Haudenosaunee had been drinking pine needle tea through the long winters for generations, not because they could name the chemistry of ascorbic acid, but because they understood the outcome. People who drank the tea through winter stayed healthy. People who did not got sick. The observation was precise, the practice was reliable, and it saved French sailors who would otherwise have died on the frozen riverbank. That story has been taught in Canadian schools for decades, but it is rarely framed as an example of indigenous medical knowledge saving European lives. It is more often told as a story about Cartier's survival. The Haudenosaunee healers who made the diagnosis and prepared the treatment are usually a footnote. And finally, the plant that earns the first position on this list. It does not have the storied origin of white willow or the cultural romance of sassafras, but it may be the single most accessible and historically widespread healing plant on the continent. You have almost certainly stepped on it this week. Number 1. Broadleaf plantain. Plantago major, not the banana-like fruit that shares the name. This is the low, ground-hugging plant with broad, oval leaves and distinctive parallel veins that grows in sidewalk cracks, along driveways, at the edges of garden beds, and in every trampled patch of ground from Maine to California. It thrives where other plants fail, in compacted soil, between paving stones, at the base of mailboxes. It is everywhere. Dozens of Native American nations used broadleaf plantain for insect bites, bee stings, minor burns, and wound care. The treatment was immediate and simple. Crush a fresh leaf and apply it directly to the affected skin. The relief was fast and reliable enough that the practice persisted across nations with no contact with each other, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. Ojibwe, Cherokee, Iroquois, and Seminole healers all used plantain in their wound care traditions. There is a good reason it worked so well across all of them. Modern analysis explains why. Plantain leaves contain aucubin, an iridoid glycoside with demonstrated antibacterial properties. They also contain allantoin, a compound that promotes cell growth and tissue repair. Allantoin is now a common ingredient in commercial skin creams and wound healing products. Pharmaceutical companies synthesize it, package it, and sell it for a profit. Meanwhile, the plant that produces it naturally is growing in the cracks of the parking lot outside the store where those products are sold. That quiet irony sits at the center of this entire list. Knowledge that indigenous healers accumulated over thousands of years through observation, repetition, and careful transmission from one generation to the next is still all around us, in the plants under our feet and the compounds inside them. Every one of these 15 plants is part of a living record, an ongoing relationship between people and the land they inhabit, rather than a museum exhibit behind glass. The chemistry is real, the history is documented, and the plants are still growing. All you have to do is learn to recognize them. If you want to go deeper into the botanical history that shaped this continent before anyone wrote it down, there is plenty more to explore on this channel. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.